in the NFL, Matt and I think, are both believers in the philosophy of building your defense out through the front seven and then focusing on secondary. Now, obviously, both are important. You can't have a terrible secondary and a great front seven. You can't have a terrible front seven and a great secondary. But my personal opinion, and it's a difference in philosophy. You can think either way; it's totally fine. The front seven is the most important side or half of your defense. And when you're looking at the best teams in the NFL, most of them, they've got a pretty darn good front seven. So we wanted to look at our top 5 front sevens, and I'm going to let Matt go first on this one. Same thing, 5-1, and then go over them all. Matt, who are the top 5 front sevens in the NFL? And in case people don't know, totally fine if you don't know, front seven is defensive line and linebackers. Just to set that straight.
Yeah, so I'll go 5-1. I'll start with honorable mentions. So I have 3 teams in my honorable mentions. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, last couple years, they would have definitely been there. Lost a couple guys, also brought in a couple guys, but they're just going to be on the outskirts for me. If you had them in your top 5, McConnell, I don't know yet. That's fine. Commanders, another honorable mention, and then the Patriots as well. The Commanders have one of the best defensive lines in the league, but their linebacking core sucks. I'm sorry, but it's not good. So it kind of hurts them a lot because, when you're thinking of who's the best defensively in terms of your D lines, Commanders are definitely going to be in that discussion. But unfortunately, I couldn't bring them in. And then Patriots, they might not have the name brand guy, so that's why I wasn't able to bring them in. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if we end up seeing the Patriots performance wise at the end of the year be a top 5 front 7 team, just because they consistently have a lot of depth, very well coached. Matthew Judon is a perfect scheme fit, but in terms of overall talent, I just couldn't bring myself to put them into the top 5. So 5-1, my top 5 front sevens. At number 5, the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, if you haven't really been paying attention to what the Eagles have been building, it is extremely impressive. They have the deepest defensive line in the entire league. They have Brandon Graham, who's been a little bit older now. Fletcher Cox. They draft Jordan Davis. Jordan Davis is currently on their depth chart, is listed as a backup. Javon Hargrave, Josh Sweat. Then their linebacking core, Hassan Reddick as well as an edge player. Linebacking core, not quite as good. Kazir White, he didn't play a ton for the Chargers last year, but he's all right. And right now they have TJ Edwards listed as their middle linebacker, but they also drafted Nakobe Dean. Nakobe Dean is one of those guys that slid way down. So I have them at number 5. Number 4, I have the Colts. The Colts have a ridiculous team. They got Darius Leonard. He changed his name to Shaq Leonard, but Darius Leonard, one of the best linebackers, if not the best linebacker in the league. DeForest Buckner, one of the best, interior defensive linemen, if not the best interior defensive lineman in the league. So you got those 2 guys. They also bring in Yannick Ngakoue, who's been a really solid edge player. Bobby Okereke, I think I said it right, but he was great last year, playing next to Darius Leonard at the linebacker spot. And then also last year they drafted Kwity Paye, who's just a very solid, fundamentally great player. So I really like their D line a lot. And then they have one of the best linebackers, another linebacker that's really good. So I really like what they have in terms of their front 7. At number 3, and my 3 and 2, honestly, I was up and down. Should I put this team 3? Should I put this team 2? I ended up going with the Rams at 3 and the Niners at 2. If you think that the Rams are ahead of the Niners, that's fine with me. However, if we look at the Rams depth chart, okay, what's the big thing for the Rams? They got Aaron Donald. They have an absolute stud. They also have Bobby Wagner. Now, he's a little bit older, definitely lost a couple steps, but he's going to be great for them next year. I expect him to be great. Leonard Floyd, another really solid player. And then it's not that great after that. A'Shaun Robinson's all right, but there's just not a ton there after that. And that's why I ended up putting the Niners just a little bit ahead of them, just because the Niners have absurd depth this season. They have such ridiculous depth. Do they have the top end guy like Aaron Donald? No, but they have a guy that's still going to be extremely effective in Nick Bosa. And they also have a much better linebacking core as well, in my opinion at least. You have Fred Warner, Aziz Al-Shaair, and you have Dre Greenlaw. And if you guys don't know those 2 players well, they're kind of perfect compliments. Each of them is a little bit different, but they're perfect compliments to be next to Fred. And the reason why I end up putting the Niners ahead is just because the Niners defensive line now, they've kind of lost some of the names on it the last few years. They don't have DeForest Buckner. We already mentioned him earlier, but they don't have DeForest Buckner, right? However, they still have Eric Armstead. They don't have D Ford. Well, They have 2 edge rushers and Samson Ebukam. Ebukam was sweet last season. He was huge down the stretch, and he's a big reason why the Niners had a big run, a big playoff run, and got hot at the end of the year. And they also drafted a guy in Drake Jackson. I know it's hard to project rookies coming into the league, but basically what the Niners coaching staff thinks is that they are so surprised that they were able to land Drake Jackson at the end of the second round because they had him listed as one of their top 20 players in the draft class. And they viewed him as a first round pick that was used not in the best way at USC because of injuries. So if Drake Jackson is 75% of what they think he is, they have a ridiculous group of a defensive line and a ridiculous group of linebackers. So it's just so complete that's why I ended up taking them ahead. And then at number 1, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, Pittsburgh Steelers, they don't have like all of like their complementary pieces that they had the last few years. But at the end of the day, they have TJ Watt, they have Cam Hayward, Devin Bush is a great backer. And they also added Miles Jack, which is just a low-key amazing move. I know he's been banged up and hasn't been quite the guy he was early on in Jacksonville, but dude, if Miles Jack's can be close to what he was, you might have a ridiculous linebacking core there. And ultimately, the Steelers are always one of the best front 7 teams in the league where it's like, yeah, a lot of that is coaching. A lot is that just the philosophy, how they're able to scout players. And I guarantee that a couple of these backups this year that are in Pittsburgh are going to be studs for them, or are going to be big time difference makers throughout the whole season. So that's mine. I'll go 1 through 5 again. Number 1, Pittsburgh Steelers. Number 2, San Francisco 49ers. Number 3, Los Angeles Rams. Number 4, Indianapolis Colts. And number 5, Philadelphia Eagles. Now, McConnell, you don't agree with me at all. So what is yours? I want to hear.
Yeah, I think this is very different from the running backs. We were pretty similar with the running backs, very similar teams. I've got a pretty different list. Number 1, Baltimore Ravens. Just kidding. That's a joke. Ravens are not in the top 5. But I'm going to go through my 5, 5-1, just like you, Matt. Starting off with number 5, I did put the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Number 4, I've got the Cleveland Browns. Number 3, Pittsburgh Steelers. Then I have a gap. I've got the Rams at 2, and I've got the Niners at 1. So starting off, Tampa Bay. I know they're getting older. I know they lost. What?
Who is 3?
Number 3 was the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Okay. Gotcha. I didn't hear what you said.
Yeah. So starting off, Tampa Bay. I know they've lost a couple of pieces, but they've got still some of the best at their position. Shaq Barrett, very solid pass rusher. I really loved Joe Tryon coming out of UW last season. He did not play college football the year before he got drafted. So last year was his return to football. I believe he sat out due to COVID was the reasoning, but last year was his first year back playing football. He should be improved this year. They took him with their final pick in that first round. Him next to Shaq Barrett is going to be really solid. I love their linebacker duo. I know Levante David isn't the same player he used to be. He used to be, in my opinion, the best linebacker in the NFL for maybe a couple of seasons, right after Luke Kuechly retired. But they also have Devin White playing next to him. I think that's very complimentary. Levante David, very smart, and then Devin White is just zipping across the entire field with that crazy speed of his. But then they have a defensive lineman by the name, I'm not pronouncing his full name because I don't know if anybody has his full name memorized outside of his parents. Vita Vea. Vita Vea, as a defensive tackle, is the best at what he does. He is the best big dude that you can have in the NFL. Now, maybe Jordan Davis rivals him this year. We're yet to see that. But Vita Vea, if you need a guy to stand there and take up blockers, he is that dude. It is very difficult to run on Vita Vea. It's also very difficult when they put him in at fullback to try and get by him as a blocker. But Vita Vea, super underrated still, I think, in the NFL. They also have Akeem Hicks, who I think is a solid player. They also have William Goldston. I think this is a very solid front 7 right there. I think it's more well-rounded than I think a lot of other teams. Then at number 4, I've got Cleveland. I think Cleveland is super underrated. Now, obviously, they're top-heavy with Myles Garrett. I think, I would say top 3 pass rusher in the NFL. They also have, Jadeveon Clowney. I think Jadeveon Clowney is super underrated. Is he the number 1 pass rusher that he was drafted to be? No. But he is an elite run stuffer, and he's a freak athlete on that defensive line. It is very difficult to get around Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney. Their linebackers, I'm also a big fan of. I love Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. And I'm also a big fan of the name Taki Taki, even though he's not their number one linebacker. But I also really do like Anthony Walker. I think those two are really solid together, and combined with a great pass rush and run defending, I think it's just a very solid. A lot of unsung heroes there, but I think it's a lot of just really good players that are able to make a lot of plays. Number 3, Pittsburgh. Matt, you went over them. I think Cam Hayward, one of the best in the NFL. What he does. Obviously, TJ Watt, sack record last year. I think he tied it. Filthy. Like, just filthy. I think the Miles Jack move, super underrated. I don't know why that's not talked about at all. But great defensive line. Then I have a gap. The LA Rams at number 2. Aaron Donald. I mean, he is... I've said this before on different podcasts. I believe he's the best football player of all time. Like, legitimately. I don't think he's had enough time to prove it. And I get people say, well, he's not better than Tom Brady. He's not better than Lawrence Taylor. When you're looking at Lawrence Taylor, I get it. When you're talking about greatness, impact on the history of the game, Lawrence Taylor's that dude. All right, but Aaron Donald has been the best player in the NFL for probably 6 seasons. Maybe since he came into the NFL. People just weren't ready to give him the title. I mean, this dude has come in, has been unblockable, except for when he plays the San Francisco 49ers. Other than that, most dominant player in the NFL. This dude is triple teamed, it seems like, every single play, and he's still able to get through. And he is just an absolute monster. I feel like he hasn't had enough time in the NFL to show that he's the best player to ever play the game, outside of position. Obviously, defensive tackle is not as important as quarterbacks. So, who would you draft number 1 overall in history? You're going with the quarterback. You're going with Brady. But I think Aaron Donald is legitimately the best defensive player of all time. Just hasn't had the time to prove it, which is why he's not greater than, not Warren Sapp, greater than Reggie White, greater than, Dion and Lawrence Taylor. But you also add in a very good edge rusher next to him that's been very dominant when playing with him, Leonard Floyd. They added Bobby Wagner, and I don't think Bobby Wagner's the same player as he was, 5 years ago. But still, he's a knowledgeable linebacker. Having a smart linebacker behind Aaron Donald, that's all you need. Right there. Like, Aaron Donald's going to allow everyone else to feast. Like, I get they may not have the names outside of Aaron Donald and Bobby Wagner and Shaq. That doesn't matter to me. Like, that's how good Aaron Donald is. Like, he's just that dominant. I don't get why people are like, oh, I don't see him as, like, the best player in the NFL. I'm like, what do you mean? You ever watch the Rams? You ever watched him play football? Like just watch him. Just watch the Rams play defense and just watch him. He may not get the sack, but you'll watch him and it'll be like, oh, he shifts across 3 defensive linemen, forces the lineman to step off of the edge rusher, and then the edge rusher gets through, and you're like, oh, wow. He created that sack, created that pressure, created that pressure, created that pressure, created that run stuff. Like, it's unbelievable watching him play the game of football. But at number 1, I've got the San Francisco 49ers because of the depth that they have, and I think they also have the best linebacker in the NFL. They may have a top 2 linebacker duo in the NFL, but Fred Warner, unbelievably good. Then they have Bosa. Unbelievably good. We saw what Bosa did his rookie year. Just absolutely filthy. He just destroyed Patrick Mahomes in that Super Bowl. Super underrated performance from them. And they just have a lot of other guys. Samson Ebukam, freaky athlete. Eric Armstead switching over to the interior. Like, I just think it's just going to be so difficult to do anything against this front seven, whether you're trying to run the ball or you're just trying to, have time in the pocket to throw a pass. It's going to be really tough to get by this team because everyone on this line is going to be coming after you, no matter who it is. And their stars are also some of the best at their position, if not the best. So that's my 5-1. Matt, I would love to hear, your kind of thoughts on it, but those are my 5.
So I think you can definitely bring in the Bucks. Like, I think that's super fair. I think they have an extremely elite front seven. But for me, the reason I end up having the Colts, I do think that you're sleeping on the Colts a little bit. I do have to say that. I think the Colts are significantly better than the Browns.
They were on my bubble.
Yeah,
I love Buck. I'm not as big a fan as Shaq Leonard as a lot of other people, though.
It's weird to call him Shaq Leonard. He's good though. He's a very good player. And the thing is like all of their other complementary pieces are good. They're not like, oh, this guy's average. No, this guy's like above average to good just across the board. So that's why I like them a lot. Um, the Browns, like, I don't want to knock on them, but like to me, I see like, all right, it's like Myles Garrett, right? And their linebacking core is not that great. Now, Owusoa,
Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is probably going to be a Pro Bowler this year. Like
yeah,
he's good.
yeah, and that's gonna be big for them. That's gonna be big for them. But like, okay, what about the D line outside of him? Clowney, like Clowney's he's not bad. Like I think people think that Clowney's just like completely washed. He's definitely not. But he's also not prime Jadeveon Clowney. He's not like the hype that Jadeveon Clowney got. So your defensive line is kind of average outside of him. Like you have one good linebacker. Like I don't know. I just don't love it as much because, dude, the Eagles like they're like I thought we were talking about the Niners depth in terms of their D line. Dude, the Eagles isn't even like close. Like their backup D line, probably like legitimately, dude, probably half of the leagues would rather have those guys than what they're gonna roll out as their starters. Like that's how deep they are. It's absurd. And they're only gonna have it for this year because I believe they're gonna lose is it Brand yeah, I think they're gonna lose Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox next year. But like, dude, they also got Derek Barnett. I didn't even bring him up. Like he's like that's a backup. Like they got Derek Barnett and Jordan Davis as backups. That's ridiculous, dude. That's absurd. So I was kind of like, I don't know, and I'm not like big. I don't know how good the Eagles are going to be, but they've actually got a really good roster. Like if you start looking, you're like, wait a second, man, wait a second, this is crazy. So I do think that they're getting a little bit slept on, and I think it's fair because like they've just added a couple guys too, and they've like slowly started building it up. But they have a good mix of younger guys and vets. So I'm really excited to see what that team looks like, just because there's some strengths, there's some weaknesses, but damn, dude, some of those strengths are like really, really good. And I like the Colts a lot. I like that we ended up both having the same top three, not in order, but in terms of the three teams. And I think that if you change the order to something else and you end up having the Rams at one because you're like, look, I really think Aaron Donald makes that big of an impact, and I like some of them. I really like the Bobby Wagner pickup. That's fine. I think that's totally fair too. But I think you could go any of the order for those top three. And I think they're all going to be sweet. And I think those are clearly going to be three teams in the top five. So I'm pumped, man. I'm really pumped because I love like when talking about like defensive lines and linebackers and stuff like that, especially being a Niners fan. That's where they've really decided they're going to put a lot of their assets in and what they're going to try to build around on the defensive side of football. So it's fun to talk about. And there are some ridiculous players in the NFL right now on the D line, which has been a lot of fun to watch over the past few years.